Humanity had always been different from the rest of the galaxy, even long before they knew other intelligent life existed. Their home planet Earth was a world full of storms, predators, diseases, and violent natural changes that shaped humans into survivors. Every creature on Earth had to fight to live, and humans were the greatest fighters of all. Their bodies healed fast, their minds adapted quickly, and their emotions, especially courage and anger, ran deeper than most species could understand. Because of this, when humans finally reached the stars, other civilizations did not see them as ordinary explorers. They saw them as Deathworlders, people born on a world so dangerous that almost no other species could survive even a day there. Too many alien cultures. A Deathworlder was a creature of legend, someone who could walk through fire and still keep moving forward. Some species feared humans deeply. They whispered stories about human soldiers who could fight even after being wounded, human scientists who worked in deadly environments without hesitation, and human explorers who traveled into places no one else dared to go. But the strange thing about humans was that although they were fierce, they were also extremely emotional. They laughed loudly, loved strongly, protected fiercely, and cared deeply for the weak. Their brutality and kindness existed side by side. This is what made the galaxy confused about them. Were humans monsters, or were they guardians? For a long time, humanity stayed mostly in their own region of space. They built strong colonies, powerful defensive fleets, and advanced research stations. They fought wars only when they were forced to, and they never invaded others without reason. But their reputation still spread far beyond their borders. Many alien children grew up hearing stories of Deathworlders, tall, powerful beings with sharp eyes and even sharper minds, who were unpredictable and dangerous. Most species chose not to involve humans in their politics, fearing what might happen if the Deathworlders became angry. In another part of the galaxy lived the Telesari, a gentle and peaceful people. Their world was beautiful, covered in silver forests and glowing lakes that reflected starlight like mirrors. The Telesari were known for their harmony. They believed in cooperation, not conflict. They valued knowledge, art, music, and spiritual growth. War was something they read about in history books, not something they experienced. Their society was designed around peace. They had no armies, no battleships, and no weapons more deadly than small security drones used for keeping wild animals away from farms. Their greatest pride was their culture, not their technology of destruction. The Telesari's weakness was their innocence. Because they had never fought any large conflict, they never prepared for the possibility that someone might attack them. They trusted treaties, alliances, and diplomatic agreements. They believed that if they showed respect to others, others would show respect back. But the galaxy was not always so kind. Far away from their world, a group of marauders, a brutal group that survived by raiding undefended colonies, began watching them. These marauders had already destroyed weaker settlements in other star systems. They moved like shadows, attacking places with little defense, stealing supplies, and leaving chaos behind. The Telesari knew the marauders existed, but they hoped the danger would never come to their peaceful stars. They had no real plan for what to do if the marauders came. The Telesari Radiant Council held quiet meetings, worrying about the rumors spreading across the borders. But every time they discussed creating a defense fleet or hiring mercenaries, the same problem appeared. They didn't have the knowledge or experience to build weapons strong enough to stop a real invasion. And deep inside, they did not want to become a militarized society. They believed war changed people, and they wanted their purity of mind to stay untouched. But fate is indifferent to innocence. One evening when the Telesari sky burnt bright with its twin moons, the first attack came. Marauder ships dropped out of warp, their engines screaming with heat and power. They hit a small research outpost first. The Telesari scientists tried to contact the council, but the signal was full of static and explosions. The outpost burned within minutes. People fled into underground shelters, terrified beyond measure. They were not prepared for the violence. They had never heard such weapons. The sound of destruction was almost unnatural to them, too loud, too dark, too cruel. The council was shaken. They had to decide whether to surrender, flee, or send a distress signal. They knew that most major powers would ignore them. The message offered nothing valuable, no resources, no trade advantage, no political gain. It was simply a cry for help from a peaceful race that had nothing to offer in return. Still, they sent the signal. It traveled across the galaxy as a desperate pulse, a message filled with fear. We are under attack. Civilians trapped. No defenses. Please, someone, anyone. Their voices carried terror the way only helpless people can. The distress signal moved through abandoned relay stations and old communication grids. The Telesari had no idea if it would reach anyone. They expected silence. They hoped maybe a small patrol ship from a nearby ally might hear them. But even that felt unlikely. They waited, crying, praying, hoping the universe would be kind. What they did not expect was for the signal to drift across a forgotten listening post at the edge of human-controlled space. It was an old station with only a handful of personnel, engineers, technicians, and a few communication officers. They spent most of their days monitoring routine signals, detecting natural radio waves from distant stars, or checking for technical faults in the communication network. They never expected to receive a real emergency message from a species they had never heard of. When the distress signal arrived, it came through fragmented and shaky. The technicians stopped what they were doing. They listened closely. They heard explosions, screams, the trembling voice of someone trying to describe the attack before their shelter collapsed. The humans in the listening post immediately felt something stir inside them, a deep, instinctive response. Humans had a strange emotional trait. They could not tolerate the suffering of innocent people. Even if those people were strangers, their hearts reacted faster than their minds. They forwarded the signal to Earth Defense Command with urgent priority. Admiral Rowan Hale, one of the most respected human military leaders, received the message. Hale had seen war. He had lost officers, friends, and even family members to past conflicts. His heart was scarred, but not hardened. When he played the Telesari distress call, he didn't hear the message of an alien species. He heard the sound of vulnerable lives begging not to die. That was enough. Hale had the authority to make difficult decisions. Many leaders would hesitate, hold meetings, or ask advisors whether the mission was worth the resources. But Hale's response was immediate and instinctive. He understood something important. If humanity did not stand up for those who could not protect themselves, then their strength meant nothing. So he issued a single order: full mobilization of the 7th Fleet. No one expected this. It was one of humanity's strongest, most heavily armed battle fleets, thousands of crew members, massive warships, carriers, and support vessels. Deploying the fleet usually required a major conflict or a direct threat to human territory. But Hale didn't care about politics or strategic value. Innocent people were dying. That was enough for him. Across human space, alarms sounded as the fleet prepared to depart. Officers ran through corridors. Pilots jumped into their fighters. Engineers powered up engines large enough to shake entire planets. Ships aligned in formation, glowing with readiness. The Deathworlders were moving. As the fleet warped out of their system, a ripple spread across space. Other civilizations noticed. They watched as the massive armada headed toward a region with no strategic importance, no trade routes, no alliances. They wondered what was happening. Some feared the humans were launching an invasion. Others guessed that something terrible must have triggered such a response. But the truth was simple. A peaceful race had cried for help, and humanity, dangerous, emotional, unpredictable humanity, had listened. This was the beginning of a story that would change the galaxy forever. A moment when the Deathworlders proved exactly what kind of beings they were. Not conquerors, not monsters, but protectors who answered every call they heard, even from strangers living under distant stars. * The Telesari distress signal drifted through space like a weak cry carried on a stormy wind. It was damaged, filled with static, and sometimes the voices were so soft they almost disappeared. But the fear inside those voices was unmistakable. Even in broken form, the message carried the sound of a civilization that had never known war suddenly facing destruction. People could be heard shouting instructions. Explosions rattled the transmitting equipment, and every few seconds someone whispered a frightened plea, as if hoping the universe itself might answer. Far away, in a quiet human listening post located on the edge of their territory, the staff were having an ordinary day. The station was old, built during a period when humanity feared that hostile alien forces might attack them. But many years had passed without any major conflict, and the station's role had mostly become routine signal monitoring. The operators listened to star noise, system updates, and communications from traveling ships. Usually, nothing exciting happened. Everything they heard was predictable, repetitive, and familiar. But then the distress signal came in. At first, one of the communication officers thought it was just interference. Strange frequencies sometimes came through when solar storms hit nearby regions of space, but this signal repeated. It didn't fade. It didn't match any known communication pattern. The officer leaned closer, adjusting filters, cleaning up the audio, and slowly the truth became clear. Someone was calling for help, and they were desperate. The officer froze. He felt the hairs on his arms rise. This wasn't a normal situation. He immediately called for his team. Together they worked to stabilize the transmission. More voices came through. A trembling voice cried that their defense towers had fallen. Another reported that schools and hospitals were being evacuated. Someone shouted in the background that the marauders had breached the city gates. A child's crying was briefly heard before the signal dipped into static. It was chaos. Real, raw chaos. Humans, no matter how tough or hardened they became, had always reacted strongly to suffering, especially when defenseless people were involved. Even the most disciplined soldiers felt their hearts tightened when they heard helpless voices begging for safety. And inside that small listening post, everyone felt the same thing at the same time. Someone had to help these people. Protocol demanded that any unknown emergency signal be immediately forwarded to Earth Defense Command. The team didn't hesitate. They packaged the message, added their analysis, and sent it with top priority. Normally, Earth's command handled the information calmly and slowly, but not this time. When Admiral Rowan Hale received the audio file in his office, he listened without blinking. The distress call echoed through the room as Hale sat in silence, letting each sound carve itself into his mind. He heard the tremble in the Telesauri leader's voice. He heard the explosions shaking the ground. He heard the panic of civilians running for safety. None of it sounded like a military trap or a political trick. It sounded like simple, terrified truth. Hale replayed the message. Then he played it again. Each time, his expression hardened, not with anger toward the Telesauri, but with anger toward whoever was hurting them. Humans had experienced war, pain, and loss. They knew what it meant to stand on the edge of extinction. And Hale, more than most, knew what it felt like to have no one come to help. He wouldn't let that happen again. Not to anyone. He called an emergency meeting of his command staff. Officers gathered around the table, expecting maybe a discussion about sending a scout ship or a diplomatic vessel. But Hale didn't believe in half measures when lives were at stake. He stood up, looked at every officer in the room, and said something that shocked them all. "We are deploying the 7th Fleet. Full mobilization. Prepare for immediate departure." For a second, the room was silent. The 7th Fleet was not some small defensive unit. It was one of humanity's strongest fleets, a group of large warships, advanced carriers, destroyers, frigates, support ships, and medical vessels. Deploying it usually required approval from multiple governments or the confirmation of a massive threat. But Hale was using it for a species humans had never met before. One commander cleared his throat carefully. "Sir, the Telesauri are not a human ally, and we have no strategic interests in that region." Hale turned toward him with eyes like steel. "Do innocent lives matter less because they are strangers?" No one argued again. Orders spread like wildfire. Every ship of the 7th Fleet came alive. Huge engines powered up, glowing blue and white as energy surged through their cores. Pilots ran into hangars to prepare fighters. Mechanics hurried across decks, tightening bolts and checking systems. Medical teams loaded supplies, expecting casualties. Even civilian volunteers aboard support vessels prepared shelters, food, and blankets. Humans had a strange ability when they decided to help. They helped with everything they had. Meanwhile, thousands of light years away, the Telesauri were reaching their breaking point. Their cities were falling one by one. The marauders didn't just attack, they hunted. They stole resources, destroyed buildings, and dragged civilians from their homes. The Telesauri had never seen such violence. Their culture had no stories of war heroes or warriors. They didn't even understand why someone would choose violence when peace was possible. In underground shelters, families held each other tightly. Children whispered questions that their parents had no answers to. "Will someone rescue us? Why are they hurting us? Is anyone listening?" The parents tried to stay strong, but fear lived in their eyes. They knew their distress signal might vanish into space, lost in darkness forever. The Radiant Council hid inside an emergency bunker, watching helplessly as cities burned. They argued, panicking, wondering if they should attempt surrender even, though surrender meant nothing to marauders. One council member broke down crying, repeating that they were foolish to believe peace could last forever. Another tried to send more distress signals, even though the communication lines were failing. Still, none of them expected help. The Telesauri were not politically important or militarily useful. The powerful galactic alliances would not mobilize fleets for them. They were small, distant, peaceful, and unimportant in the eyes of most empires. But something unexpected was already moving through the darkness of space. The 7th Fleet jumped through hyperspace, leaving behind streaks of brilliant light. Thousands of human crew members sat at their stations, checking coordinates, gripping their consoles, preparing for battle. They didn't know who the Telesauri were. They didn't know what the marauders were planning. But they knew this. Innocent people were in danger, and that was enough reason to fight. Captain Myra Solon, commander of the warship Horizon's Wrath, watched the stars blur as they traveled. She thought of her childhood, of old Earth stories where heroes protected villagers from monsters. She felt as if she was living one of those tales now. Her crew felt the same. They were not going to save an ally. They were not going to gain resources. They were going to save lives. On another ship, a group of young soldiers sat together, whispering about the mission. "Do you think they'll still be alive when we get there?" One asked. "We'll make sure they are," another replied, gripping his helmet with determination. Humans didn't abandon people, not if they could help it in the fleet's central flagship. Admiral Hale stood on the bridge, staring ahead with a calm expression. His mind replayed the Telesauri voices over and over. He wasn't only thinking like a military leader. He was thinking like a human being. He imagined being in their place, defenseless, terrified, waiting for help that might never come. And with each thought, his resolve grew stronger. He issued a final message to the entire fleet. "We are answering a call for help. Remember who we are. Remember what we stand for. We fight not for advantage, not for politics, but for life. Let the galaxy see what Deathworlders do when the innocent cry out." Across all ships, the crew straightened their backs. Some smiled, some clenched their fists, others quietly whispered, "Yes, sir." As the fleet raced toward the Telesauri world, something else began happening in the galaxy. Rumors started spreading. Alien governments detected the movement of the human armada and panicked. Some feared that humanity was planning to conquer new territories. Others worried that the Deathworlders had finally snapped. But a few wise leaders understood the truth. If humans had deployed the 7th Fleet, Someone must have needed help badly. While diplomats debated and speculated, the Telesari continued to fight their losing struggle. The marauders advanced deeper into the final settlement. People were trapped in crystal buildings, listening to explosions ripple across their once peaceful lands. Every hour, hope slipped away a little more, but hope was not gone. It was simply traveling across the stars at unstoppable speed. The Deathworlders were coming, and the universe was about to learn what that truly meant. Asterisk. The Seventh Fleet moved through hyperspace like a storm of fire and steel, its enormous engines bending light around them as they pushed forward with everything they had. Inside every ship, tension filled the halls. The humans knew they were entering a conflict. They did not understand fighting an enemy they had never faced, while trying to save a peaceful species they had never met. But none of that stopped them. If anything, it made their determination stronger. Humanity was built for challenges. Their hearts grew sharper when danger rose. Their courage became louder when innocent lives were at stake. While the fleet traveled, the situation on the Telesari homeworld continued to collapse. Smoke covered parts of the planet like a dark blanket. The destruction spread across the silver forests and glowing lakes that once made their world peaceful. Cities that had never seen violence were now filled with broken buildings, shattered glass, and terrified families running for shelter. The Telesari had always believed that kindness and cooperation could solve every problem. But the marauders did not care about kindness. They cared only about power, domination, and fear. The marauders were not a structured empire. They were a cluster of violent groups who survived by raiding weaker civilizations, stealing resources, and leaving behind ruins. Their ships were ugly but heavily armored, patched together from stolen parts. Their weapons were brutal, designed to inflict maximum pain and damage. They attacked without mercy, laughter echoing inside their metal hulls as they destroyed peaceful settlements. The Telesari tried everything they could think of. They evacuated the elderly. They hid children underground. They attempted negotiation, sending desperate pleas to the marauders to stop. They even tried offering food shipments and energy crystals as gifts. But the marauders did not want gifts. They wanted dominance. They wanted the thrill of crushing someone weaker. They enjoyed watching fear bloom in the eyes of people who had never fought before. One by one, Telesari colonies fell. The marauders grew bolder, mocking the Telesari's weakness. They tore down statues of peace, broke into research centers, and stripped valuable equipment. The Telesari guards who were never trained for war held small weapons with shaking hands. But they couldn't resist a full attack. They were overwhelmed every time, and each defeat echoed louder than the last, filling the remaining settlements with dread. Inside the final major city, thousands of Telesari crowded into shelters beneath the crystal buildings. The shelters were designed for storms, not for war. They shook violently each time the marauders fired their weapons. People hugged each other tightly, flinching with every explosion. Children cried quietly, confused by the noise and the fear in their parents' faces. That Telesari had always taught their young that the universe was full of kindness and wisdom. But now, that belief cracked like fragile glass. Above the planet, the marauder fleet was preparing for its final strike. Their leader, Captain Kargath, stood on his command deck wearing armor made from the bones of defeated enemies. His voice was rough and cruel. His crew followed him because he made them rich, not because they respected him. He watched the burning world with satisfaction. He wanted to erase the Telesari not because they had done anything wrong, but because their destruction would make other peaceful species fear the marauders even more. Fear was his favorite currency. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Seventh Fleet was finalizing its battle plans. Inside the flagship, Admiral Hale stood before a massive holographic display showing the Telesari homeworld. The map highlighted burning cities, destroyed settlements, and the largest cluster of marauder ships. Hale studied the details with a calm but intense expression. He knew time was running out. Every second they took to plan was another second in which civilians were dying. Captain Mirasolin and other senior officers stood beside him. They were all experienced, but none of them took this mission lightly. They didn't know how many lives they would save, but they knew how many they might lose if they arrived too late. "We need to hit their flagship first," Mira said, pointing at the marauders' largest vessel. "If we take out their command center, the rest will fall into chaos." Another officer leaned forward, frowning. "The Telesari city is directly beneath the marauder fleet. If we attack at the wrong angle, we could cause debris to fall on civilians." Hale nodded. "Then we won't attack at the wrong angle." His confidence wasn't arrogance. It was human nature. Humans had always performed best when situations seemed impossible. Back on the Telesari world, hope was fading. The Radiant Council was in complete disarray. Their communications officer tried again and again to resend the distress signal. Even though the broadcasting tower had taken heavy damage, the message barely reached orbit, but it continued floating outward through static-filled channels. Some council members wanted to attempt a mass evacuation, but their ships were too few and too slow. They knew the marauders would shoot them down before they escaped the atmosphere. A tired cleric whispered softly to the group, "Perhaps no one is coming." His voice trembled, and he looked older than his years. But then something unusual happened. The Telesari sky flickered just for a moment as if a star had blinked. A few people noticed it while huddling near shelter entrances. They didn't understand the meaning, but they felt a strange shift in the air, like the calm before a storm. No one said anything. They were afraid to hope. Hope had become too painful. The Marauders did notice something. Their scanners reported a large warp disturbance approaching their sector. But the readings were strange, almost impossible to interpret. Kargath assumed it was a malfunction. No fleet that large should be able to travel so fast. No fleet that powerful should be coming to a world with no strategic value. But Admiral Hale's fleet was still minutes away, racing through hyperspace. Inside every ship, crew members checked weapons, confirmed coordinates, and tightened their grips on their consoles. Their eyes burned with focus. Humanity wasn't perfect, far from it, but when humans made a promise to themselves, especially a promise to protect, they threw their entire strength into it. As the fleet neared their destination, an energy tremor rippled through space. Pilots sat up straighter. The bridge crew of every vessel held their breath. Myra Solon whispered to her second, "We're almost there." And then, all at once, the fleet dropped out of hyperspace. The darkness of space shattered with light. 1,000 points of brilliance sparked open, forming the fleet's arrival. Massive human warships appeared in perfect formation, their hulls glowing with the heat of hyperspace travel. They filled the sky above the Telesari world like a wall of armored giants. They cast shadows large enough to cover mountains. The space around them vibrated with a deep hum of human engines. Down on the planet, thousands of Telesari stared upward, stunned. The sky had turned into a field of light. They didn't understand what they were seeing. Their hearts raced with equal parts awe and fear. The Marauders froze. Captain Kargath's expression twisted into confusion, then panic. He shouted at his crew to analyze the arrival pattern, but they already knew what it meant. The Deathworlders had come. Rumors always said that if humans deployed a full fleet, the galaxy would feel it, and now the Marauders understood why. Within seconds, human targeting systems locked onto enemy vessels. Energy levels surged, weapons charged, and pilots accelerated toward battle launch positions. The human fleet wasn't simply ready, they were eager. They had flown across the stars for this moment. Down on the planet, an old Telesari elder whispered, barely able to breathe, "The universe has answered us." The rising conflict turned into a cold, sharp tension that settled over the battlefield. All sides felt the same truth. The next moments would decide everything. The Telesari's survival, the Marauders' fate, the Deathworlders' legacy. The storm was about to break. By the time the humans reached the Telesari system, the situation had already become a nightmare. The Marauders had pushed the Telesari forces back again and again, destroying every defensive line the peaceful species put up. The Telesari were not warriors. Their cities were built from beautiful crystal towers that shone under their planet's soft twin suns. Their technology focused on harmony, communication, and art. They had never prepared for a war, especially not against a species that lived only to conquer, feed, and destroy. The last major settlement had become a cage. Thousands of civilians had hidden inside the deep crystalline shelters beneath the city, hoping the thick mineral layers would protect them from the Marauders' weapons. Families huddled together. Children cried without sound, trained to stay silent so they would not be discovered. Elders held hands and whispered old prayers they had long forgotten. The Telesari leaders tried to remain calm, but their voices shook as they updated the hiding civilians through the comms outside. The Marauders stood like a dark tide ready to flood everything. Their ships hovered above the city like floating knives. Their ground troops pushed into the outer districts, setting fire to anything they could not use. The air trembled with the energy buildup of their main weapon. The Telesari had seen this before on other worlds. Once that weapon fired, nothing living remained. Inside the shelters, people felt the vibration in the walls. It was the vibration of death coming closer. Some Telesari covered the ears of their young ones. Others tried to send final messages into space, even though they knew no one would hear them. The Council of Elders spoke quietly to each other, accepting that their time had come. They had sent many distress signals, but no ally was close enough to reach them in time. Their world, culture, and history were about to disappear forever. Then everything changed. It began with a strange tremor in the sky. The Marauders felt it first, an unexpected ripple cutting through their senses. Alarms began flashing on their ships, but they brushed it off at first. They believed no one could challenge them. They believed no force could reach this system before they completed their destruction. They had faced many species across the galaxy, and none had been able to stop them. But this tremor was different. It grew stronger, forming a tear in the very fabric of space. A streak of brilliant light split open the sky directly above the settlement. Every sensor, both Telesari and Marauder, instantly overloaded. Screens turned to static. Instruments burned out. Pilots shouted in panic. Commanders demanded status reports, but every officer responded with confusion. Even the Telesari hiding underground felt the ground hum as though a giant heartbeat pulsed overhead. In that moment of blinding light, the Telesari thought the Marauders were finally unleashing their ultimate weapon. They braced for the end. Some closed their eyes. Others held their families tighter. But instead of destruction, they heard something else, a sound like a thunderstorm made of metal and power. When the light faded, they looked up through cracks in the crystal shelters, and what they saw made them forget how to breathe. A human fleet had arrived. Dozens of massive warships hung in the sky, each one shaped like a dark blade wrapped in blue engine fire. They appeared in perfect formation, aligned like soldiers standing at attention. Their hulls glowed with energy shields strong enough to crack moons. Their weapons were already locked onto every marauder ship in the system. The human fleet did not drift in. It arrived like a hammer striking stone. To the Telesauri, who had never seen humans before, it looked like gods had come from the heavens. Even their ancient stories did not describe anything so powerful, so controlled, and so fearlessly precise. As light reflected off the crystal towers, the human ships appeared like shining giants protecting the city. To the marauders, it looked like judgment. The second the humans finished exiting warp, their attack began. There was no warning, no negotiation, no slow build-up. Human ships fired with a level of precision that felt impossible. Their targeting systems locked onto every marauder vessel at once. Bright spears of energy shot across the sky, hitting engines before pilots even understood what was happening. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers. Marauder ships twisted and broke apart, crashing down in burning fragments on the ground. The marauder troops looked up in horror as their air support vanished in seconds. Their commanders screamed orders at them, but confusion spread faster than discipline. They had fought hundreds of species before, but nothing prepared them for humans. Deathworlders, known only in distant rumors. Stories said humans were unpredictable, dangerous, and terrifyingly brave, but the marauders had never believed the stories. Now they realized those stories were gentle compared to the truth. Human dropships descended like lightning. They didn't move slowly. They slammed down with purpose, kicking up dust and shattered crystal. Armored soldiers emerged, their exosuits glowing as they activated shields. They didn't hesitate. They moved like a single living machine, targeting every marauder within reach. The ground shook as their weapons fired. Each shot found its target. Every movement was designed to end the fight quickly. The Telesauri, hiding in the shelters, could hear the distant roars of combat, but the sounds were different this time. They were not the screams of their people dying. They were the brutal strikes of an unstoppable force destroying the invaders. It was the first time the Telesauri heard war working in their favor. Above the city, the human flagship unleashed a high-precision barrage at the marauders' largest vessel. The blast tore through its hull, cutting it in half. Fire erupted through space, lighting up the entire sky like a second sun. The marauder commander tried to retreat, but the humans had already predicted the escape. Another shot ended the ship instantly. On the ground, marauder forces began to break. Their lines collapsed. Soldiers ran, some throwing down their weapons, but the humans were faster. They moved with a calm determination that made them frightening, not because of cruelty, but because of certainty. They knew exactly what needed to be done to protect the Telesauri. For them, this wasn't war for profit or power. It was a simple decision: protect life. Within minutes, it was over. A silence spread through the battlefield. Smoke rose in thin columns. The remains of marauder machinery flickered with dying sparks. Telesauri citizens peeked out between the shimmering crystal walls, hardly believing what they were seeing. Some stepped outside slowly, expecting the humans to turn on them. But the humans didn't raise their weapons. Instead, they lowered them. One human soldier removed their helmet and spoke softly into a translator. The message echoed across the ruins: "You're safe. We're here to help." Many Telesauri began crying. They had never heard such words during a crisis. They had never seen such a powerful force use its strength to protect them rather than destroy them. What struck them most was not the victory, it was the speed, the precision, and the intent. Human warships had fought for them. Deathworlders, known for surviving the harshest planet in the galaxy, had unleashed their full military wrath not on the Telesauri but for them. That realization spread through the survivors like warmth after a long winter. In that moment, trust began to form between the two species. The Telesauri saw that humans were not monsters. They were protectors capable of terrifying power, but also capable of compassion so fierce it felt like a shield made of fire. The Telesauri understood that humans fought not because they enjoyed war, but because they refused to let innocent lives be erased. The humans had arrived at the last possible moment, but for the Telesauri it felt like destiny. Their world had been saved by strangers from a distant star, strangers who brought hope in the middle of destruction. And from that day forward, the Telesauri would never forget the sight of the sky splitting open as the human fleet descended. They would remember it as the moment when gods did not come to judge them, but to protect them. When the last marauder ship fell silent and the sky finally cleared, the Telesauri expected the humans to leave. They thought the humans would return to their distant worlds after showing their incredible power. Every species that had ever come to the Telesauri homeland before, traders, travelers, explorers, always left quickly. No one stayed long, and no one risked anything for them. The Telesauri believed the humans would act the same way, especially after such a dangerous battle. But something happened that shocked everyone. The human fleet did not turn away. Instead, the largest human transport ship activated its landing bay lights. Engines roared like distant thunder. Shuttles broke formation and descended toward the surface. The Telesari watched from their shelters with trembling hands, thinking the humans were sending more soldiers to secure the area or to examine the ruins of the marauders. But when the shuttles touched ground, the doors opened and it wasn't warriors who stepped out. The first humans who emerged were medics wearing white and blue armor. They carried medical kits, scanners, blankets, and nutrient packs. Behind them came engineers with tools, drones, portable generators, and repair equipment. A few security teams followed to ensure the area was safe, but they stood calmly, not aggressively. Their weapons were holstered. Their body language was peaceful. This moment confused the Telesari more than the battle itself. They had just witnessed humans fighting like unstoppable forces, strong enough to destroy a fleet in minutes. They expected a species with such strength to act proud, demanding, or at the very least cold and distant. But the humans moved with gentle purpose, not dominance. They scanned the wounded, offered water, and gently guided families toward makeshift medical stations. Then, to everyone's surprise, Admiral Hale himself stepped down the ramp of the lead shuttle. The Telesari had never seen a human up close before. Admiral Hale was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a dark navy uniform marked with silver insignia. His presence was powerful, but not frightening. The moment his boots touched the crystalline soil of Telesari, every nearby Telesari leader stiffened in awe. Admiral Hale looked around at the damaged city, the shattered towers, the smoke drifting through the air, the frightened civilians taking cover behind broken walls. His expression was not pride or arrogance. It was calm sorrow and responsibility. He walked straight toward the Telesari Council, who were unsure whether to bow, salute, or hide. Their hands shook. Their voices trembled. They had never expected a Deathworlder commander to stand gently before them, before they could even speak. Admiral Hale placed a hand over his heart, a gesture of peace, and said simple words that would echo through Telesari history forever. You called for help, so we came. There was no demand for tribute, no expectation of reward, no political speech, just a clear, honest answer. The distress signal they had sent, one they believed no one would hear, had traveled across the stars, and humans had answered without hesitation. The Telesari leadership could barely reply. Tears filled their eyes. They had believed their species would end that day. They had believed that no one cared about them in the vast, cold galaxy. Yet here was a human admiral, offering hope like it was the most natural thing in the universe. The council bowed deeply and thanked him, but Admiral Hale simply nodded and stepped aside, so the medics could begin their work. The humans moved quickly and efficiently. Medics placed scanning pads on wounded Telesari and treated burns, broken limbs, and shock symptoms. Some Telesari stared at the humans' hands, noticing how careful they were, how they moved slowly so as not to scare them. Young Telesari hesitated at first, but when a human medic gently wrapped a shimmering blue blanket over a frightened child, the fear began to break. Engineers spread out through the city, activating drones that hummed softly as they floated over buildings. These drones scanned for structural weaknesses, power losses, or hidden pockets of survivors. Within an hour, humans had restored portable lighting in areas that had gone dark. They patched broken energy lines with temporary conduits. They repaired damaged water filters and helped the Telesari rebuild their central generator for a species recovering from an attack. These actions were nothing short of life-saving. Security teams moved with respect. They did not shout commands or push the Telesari aside. Instead, they stood watch at key points to make sure no remaining marauders tried to return. Their presence felt protective, not threatening. Telesari survivors found comfort knowing that these tall armored beings were keeping watch for them. As day turned to night, the human engineering teams activated a large defensive shield around the settlement. A shimmering dome of energy grew above the ruins, covering the entire area like a protective bubble. The Telesari watched in silent amazement as the barrier flickered to life. It was more advanced than anything they had ever built, strong enough to repel heavy artillery and stealth attacks. For the first time since the war started, the Telesari slept without fear of another surprise strike. Over the next few days, humans and Telesari worked side by side. Joint patrol teams were formed, half human soldiers, half Telesari volunteers. The humans taught them how to move safely through damaged areas, how to detect hidden marauder traps, and how to secure roads and shelters. Many of the marauders who had survived the first battle were still hiding in nearby regions, but the combined patrols tracked them down with efficiency. Whenever the marauders tried to ambush, the humans reacted instantly. Their reflexes were sharp, shaped by a lifetime of surviving on a dangerous world. Their instincts saved many Telesari lives during these patrols. The Telesari could hardly believe how humans operated. They were fierce in battle, yet gentle in peace. They were built like walking weapons, yet they carried injured Telesari as if they were precious things made of glass. They were Deathworlders, beings from a planet full of storms, predators, and natural disasters, but they used their toughness to protect others rather than intimidate them. What amazed the Telesari even more was what the humans refused. After the settlement was stabilized, the Telesari Council prepared an offering of precious crystals, art pieces, and technological gifts. It was a traditional gesture meant to show gratitude and repay a life. The Telesari believed the humans would accept it. After all, many species demanded payment for military assistance, but when the council offered the gifts to Admiral Hale, he simply shook his head. "We don't want payment," he said. "We're not here for profit. We're here because you needed help. That's enough." The Telesari was stunned. They asked if humans wanted a treaty or political influence. Admiral Hale declined again. They asked if he wanted access to Telesari technology or resources. He refused politely a third time. The Telesari truly could not understand how a species so powerful could also be so unwilling to take advantage of the situation. Humans insisted only on one thing: a temporary protection agreement. Just until the Marauder threat was completely gone, they promised not to interfere with Telesari politics or culture. They only wanted to ensure the survivors were safe and could rebuild. This baffled the Telesari in ways they could not explain. Every species they had met before behaved differently, more cautious, more demanding, more so. But the humans showed an instinctive compassion that felt almost unreal. They didn't help for glory or gain. They helped because someone needed them. Many Telesari began watching the humans, not with fear, but with quiet admiration. They noticed how the humans shared their food with hungry civilians, how they repaired toys for children, how they comforted those who mourned their loved ones. Some human soldiers even sat beside elderly Telesari and listened to their stories, offering company in their grief. The more the Telesari saw, the deeper their confusion grew. How could a species strong enough to shatter a fleet be so gentle? How could beings from a deadly world possess hearts so open? How could those known across the galaxy as Deathworlders also be capable of such warmth? Even the children sensed the kindness. They approached human engineers shyly, bringing them flowers made from bits of broken crystal. The humans accepted these little gifts with soft smiles and placed them on their uniforms. One child even hugged a human medic, wrapping tiny arms around a massive armored leg. The medic carefully knelt down and hugged the child back. Moments like these changed the way the Telesari saw humans forever. What began as fear turned into respect. Respect turned into gratitude. Gratitude grew into a quiet, powerful bond between the two species. And the Telesari realized that humanity's greatest strength was not their ships, weapons, or technology. Their greatest strength was their instinct to protect. In the days that followed, the Telesari stopped calling humans Deathworlders. They began calling them Guardians, and for the first time in a long time, the galaxy felt a little safer. When the fighting ended and the humans finally began preparing to leave, the story of what they had done did not stay on the quiet Telesari world for long. Signals, recordings, eyewitness accounts, and data logs spread across the galaxy at incredible speed, moving through communication networks, diplomatic channels, and trade routes. Within days, every major civilization heard the same unbelievable news. Humans known as Deathworlders had deployed a full battle fleet to save a species that held no political importance, no economic advantage, and no strategic value. Many found it impossible to believe. Entire planets that had never cared about the Telesari were suddenly discussing them. Council members argued. Analysts questioned the reports, convinced it had to be an error or a trick. Some believed the humans must have wanted something, some rare resource or secret technology. Others thought it was a calculated move to gain influence in the region. But when official statements confirmed that the humans asked for nothing, the galaxy was thrown into confusion. For generations, the Deathworlders had been viewed as dangerous, powerful, and unpredictable. Every species knew that the human home planet Earth was one of the harshest natural environments ever discovered. Humans had evolved by surviving storms, predators, diseases, and disasters that would have extinguished most species. Their bodies were strong, their minds adaptable, and their instincts sharp. This made them both respected and feared. Most civilizations tried not to provoke humans, believing that a species shaped by such constant struggle could react with overwhelming force. But now the entire galaxy was trying to understand why such a species would risk so much for strangers. Some political leaders were troubled by this development. In the Grand Galactic Council, members whispered among themselves, unsure whether this act made humans noble or terrifying. "I do not like uncertainty," one ambassador muttered. "A predictable enemy is safer than an unpredictable ally," another added. "A species powerful enough to erase a fleet in minutes and gentle enough to help civilians afterward. What else are they capable of?" A few council members believed that this compassion made humans even more dangerous, not because compassion was harmful, but because it made humans impossible to predict. They could destroy an empire, or they could save one. They could enter a battlefield with unstoppable fury, or they could kneel beside a frightened child, offering comfort. No single rule seemed to define them, and that frightened the more cautious species. Other civilizations, however, saw something else in the humans' actions. They saw hope. They saw strength tied with a moral code. They saw that the Deathworlders had chosen, entirely on their own, to be protectors, and for many weaker species living in fear of raiders, pirates, and hostile empires, this story felt like a light in the darkness. It meant that somewhere among the stars existed a species strong enough to fight evil, and kind enough to do it without asking for anything in return. Meanwhile, on the Telesari homeworld, the impact of the humans' arrival was deeper than anyone could have predicted. The Telesari recorded every moment of the rescue. They preserved every detail they could: the sound of the human fleet exiting warp, the calm voice of Admiral Hale giving orders, the gentle hands of medics easing their pain, and the sight of human engineers rebuilding their broken infrastructure. These events were not just history, they were sacred memories. For the first time in their peaceful, vulnerable lives, they had seen a force powerful enough to save them, yet merciful enough to treat them with dignity. The marauders had treated them as weak, helpless prey, but the humans treated them as equals, as friends, as lives worth saving. The Telesari language gained a new phrase, one that would be taught to children for centuries: the war between stars. This was the name they gave the humans. They described them as the guardians who stood between life and extinction, as the shield that rose when all others failed, as the beings who protected not because of duty or reward, but because their hearts refused to ignore suffering. Songs were written about the humans, stories were carved into crystal, festivals were planned to honor the day the sky split open and the human fleet arrived, shining like salvation. Even elders, who usually feared change, spoke proudly of the Deathworlders. They said the humans carried the spirit of the storms from their world, not storms that destroy, but storms that cleanse the sky and bring new life. As the days passed and the settlement healed, the humans prepared their final departure. They did not vanish suddenly, like some saviors in stories. Instead, they worked carefully to leave the Telesari safe. They helped rebuild communication towers, reinforced the planetary shields, and trained Telesari volunteers to defend themselves in the future. Only when every system was stable and every threat removed did Admiral Hale declare the mission complete. The Telesari gathered to say goodbye. They expected some grand speech, some ceremony, or perhaps even a promise of future alliances. But Admiral Hale simply approached their newly restored archives, a building filled with glowing memory crystals, and placed a single message inside. His voice was calm, steady, and carried the weight of a promise that would outlast lifetimes. If you ever need help again, just call. We answer every cry we hear. The message was short, but its meaning was enormous. To the Telesari, those words meant they would never again be alone in the galaxy. They would never again face extinction without hope. They would never again believe they were too small or insignificant to matter. When the humans boarded their ships and the fleet rose into the sky, the Telesari watched in silence. Many cried not out of fear, but out of gratitude so deep it hurt. They felt as though giants had walked among them, and shown them a kindness they would never forget. The human fleet formed its departure pattern. Engines glowed bright. Then, in a moment as breathtaking as their arrival, they vanished into the stars, leaving behind a world forever changed. Across the galaxy, the reputation of the Deathworlders transformed. They were no longer seen as conquerors or threats. They were spoken of as protectors who would cross the darkness for those who could not defend themselves. The species that once avoided humans now watched them with admiration. Diplomatic channels opened. Even enemies reconsidered their prejudice. But most importantly, small, peaceful civilizations, the ones always overshadowed by powerful empires, felt a new courage. The ideas spread like starlight. If danger ever came for them, perhaps the humans would hear their cry. In quiet corners of the galaxy, where fear had always lived, hope slowly took its place. And so the Death, shaped by a world that demanded strength, became the guardians of species who had never known such power. Their legend grew not from war or conquest, but from the simple decision to help those who needed it. A decision that required no reward, no praise, and no gain, just a call for help and a species strong enough and kind enough to answer.